How's it going? This is Congressman French Hill with my friend Congressman Rick Crawford, and we are together today because it's Agriculture Day. And I can't think of a better person to talk about agriculture with than Rick Crawford, who's on the House Ag Committee, a senior member of that committee. And Arkansas, it's our largest source of our GDP for the state. So, Rick, a lot of people are disconnected with where their food comes from. I know that sounds like a cliche,
No.
but it's not. We have a very urbanizing culture, and I think people think food comes from the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know it comes from the hardworking men and women out there in production agriculture across the country.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so important to get Americans to connect now and talk to their members of Congress as we write a new farm bill, which you're right in the
We're
middle?
right in the middle of it. What I would say is that people don't understand this, but if you eat, you're involved in agriculture. We're all part of the food chain. And so it's important to recognize where your food comes from. But I like for people to understand that it is a national security imperative that we be able to feed and clothe ourselves and not rely on foreign sources for that. And so if we have a better understanding of that, where our food and fiber comes from, hopefully we have a better understanding of the investment that's made on the behalf of the taxpayer. Obviously it's taxpayer dollars, but it's actually to support and agriculture is an industry that's not like a lot of other industries. There's a lot of variables that we simply can't control, and so
You got the weather, you got international trade, you got international subsidies, you've got international conditions and weather.
Absolutely. And you mentioned trade. I know you spent time in the Bush administration focused on trade,
Right.
among other issues. How important is that to agriculture, that we just sort of assume that we're able to sell our goods, but trade plays an important role?
Well, it's critical. I mean, as I said, agriculture is the largest part of our GDP in Arkansas. And we have tens of thousands of jobs connected to agriculture because we export our soybeans, our rice, our poultry. And what's more important about that, I think, in today's debate, is our two largest markets are Canada and Mexico.
Absolutely.
And so I know you and I've talked a lot about the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. President Trump wants to strengthen it. I think we both support him in strengthening it.
Mm-hmm.
But we do remind him how important agriculture is. That's why I was glad to see the president go to the Farm Bureau meeting. I think the first president to speak to Farm Bureau since President Reagan.
25 odd years, 26, 27 years. Yeah, that's important. What's equally important too is that we have an ag secretary who totally understands that, who's been really forthright in supporting trade, particularly NAFTA. So I know he's in the president's ear on that issue,
Right.
and really pushing that and recognizing how important that is to our farmers.
I say the other thing that's important for farmers as we get into trade disputes, as we try to demand fair trade from our partners around the world. Both countries we're allied with, like South Korea or Japan, and then countries that we have even an adversarial relationship with or arm's length relationship, say China, for example, that agriculture is frequently the source of get caught in the middle, where we may want to stop dumping of a particular product from a country, but they may retaliate on us with ag. So that's something I know that your committee is concerned about as well.
Absolutely. There's a whole lot of moving parts when you talk about trade, and it's kind of like they use the analogy of squeezing a balloon. You squeeze it over here and then it kind of inflates over here a little bit, and so it's not something you can just look at with a narrow focus and look at a single issue. And certainly ag gets caught up in that, hyper political, and then things like rice are so political. In some countries, like in Japan, for example, it's almost like a deity status. I mean,
it's a cultural
highly
icon.
revered, and so trying to break into a market like Japan is difficult. Certainly for southern long grain producers, that's the case. And so, but we want to see access to these markets, and not necessarily, what people use the term free trade and fair trade. They're not interchangeable.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, our goal in the United States, people always ask, what is the purpose of your trade policy? And it is to open markets for our exports. And it is to encourage our companies and farmers to export. And we do that by getting rid of non-tariff type barriers, like saying that Japanese consumers don't want long grain rice. Culturally, they don't. They want short grain rice. And California's done a great job competing in that business.
Absolutely.
But that'd be like a non-tariff barrier versus just raising the cost and prohibiting the product.
That's right.
And then I guess genetically modified is. Can you explain to our constituents a little bit about that and why that's a big deal for our growers, and particularly in the EU, I guess?
Sure.
Maybe.
Well, genetically modified
What
organisms.
does that mean?
Well, that's a good question, because GMOs have been around really since time began. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon with cross-pollination and things like that.
Right.
But one of the oldest examples of a genetically modified organism is the mule. The hybrid of the horse and the donkey.
Yeah.
And they've been a big, important part of the development of this country and others, and certainly we relied heavily on mules back in the day. But that's an example of a GMO. So are we to be afraid of that technology? And when we're saying we can create a strain of corn, for example, that maybe is drought resistant or resistant to a particular bug,
Right.
or particular insecticide or herbicide. And so I don't think that the science supports that. I think it's a lot of, much ado about nothing, really. I don't think that, and quite frankly, when you see populations around the world that are starving but are willing to turn their nose up at GMO crops,
Yeah.
I think we've got a priority issue.
Yeah, I really think that's one where we need to do a better job as Americans, and as we're known for our technology. We're known for the invention of the iPhone, and yet we are feeding the world by virtue of the technology that we've used in agriculture. So we need to I think set the record straight on what that means and how it's safe and good and feeds more of the world's billions, because we're able to innovate like that.
Well, the fact is that if we're going to feed just the 300 million that we're responsible for in our country, we're going to have to rely heavily on technology. But we just as we rely on trade markets being open,
Right.
that technology feeds into that, and that we need that technology to be able to feed the other billions of people around the planet that rely heavily on the United States as a key provider of food and fiber. Not the only provider, but certainly a significant provider of food and fiber.
How often do we do farm bills?
Every 5 years, ideally.
Yep. And so what do you think is the top issue on the agriculture side of the bill?
Well, on the ag side, we're not going to see a whole lot of changes. I think that the farm bill, and I'm not saying that we got that 100% right last time around, the biggest thing we'll see is bringing cotton back into what we call Title I, the commodity title of the Farm Bill, and that is to say that cotton kind of went off on their own, favoring a particular crop insurance program that did not pan out like they thought. So it's been brought back into Title I, and that's going to be codified in this next Farm Bill. And I think that's good from the standpoint of lenders, which you have that perspective,
Right.
having been a banker and carried a huge portfolio of ag.
Yep.
I'm sure that would be something that a banker would appreciate.
Well, when I was in banking in the 2000s and late 90s, we banked in farmers in Chico County and Ashley County, so the Eudora, Lake Village, and Hamburg area. And a lot were involved in row crop agriculture and catfish. And certainly being able to market that crop and finance that crop was critical. And it's very challenging when you don't know what the price is going to be and you're not certain of the collateral value. So ag lending is challenging. And these programs are important because they give some window on what the expectations are for marketing the crop, how crop insurance works, so that the bank has some feel for the cash collateral from the crop, the land, and then any kind of insurance proceeds in case there's a draw on that insurance.
Well, I think that's the one thing we can expect in this Farm Bill is continuity from the current law moving into the next authorization of the Farm Bill. So not a whole lot of change there. As I said, really cotton would be bringing them into the price loss coverage program. That's actually good, but for the other crops, maintaining that continuity with the reference prices and so on, so the lenders can have some certainty, the farmers can have some certainty. They've built kind of their cash flow models on this policy, so therefore we're maintaining that, and I think that's important.
Well, you've gotten a little look at Agriculture Day and the operations that are going on here at the House Agricultural Committee as they work on a new farm bill, and also an outlook on global trade and how important agriculture and trade are to all of us in Arkansas. And Rick, it's been good to be with you.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks.